Hey everyone. Welcome to ICS, Introduction to Cybersecurity. Super pumped to have you all here today. Whether you're just stepping into the world of cyber or looking to sharpen your skills, you're in the right place. Okay, let's try to figure out the answer to this question. The question is asking which threat consequence is caused by incapacitation, corruption, and obstruction. The options are usurpation, disruption, unauthorized disclosure, and deception. First, I need to recall what each of these terms means in the context of cybersecurity threats. From what I remember, threat actions can lead to different types of consequences, such as compromising confidentiality, integrity, availability, or other security aspects. The question mentions three specific threat actions: incapacitation, corruption, and obstruction. Let me break them down one by one. Incapacitation probably refers to making a system or service unavailable. For example, a denial of service attack would incapacitate a system by overwhelming it with traffic, rendering it unable to function normally. That sounds like it affects availability. Corruption likely involves altering or damaging data or system processes. If data is corrupted, its integrity is compromised. So corruption would be a threat to integrity. However, if the corruption is severe enough, it might also affect availability because the system can't operate correctly with corrupted data. Obstruction might mean blocking or interfering with normal operations. This could be similar to incapacitation in that it prevents the system from working as intended. For example, obstructing network traffic could prevent users from accessing a service, again affecting availability. So all three actions, incapacitation, corruption, and obstruction, seem to interfere with the system's normal operations. They either make the system unavailable, corrupt its data, or block its processes. The common thread here is that they disrupt the system's functionality. Now looking at the options. Usurpation. This term isn't as familiar, but I think it relates to taking unauthorized control of a system or resources. Like a privilege escalation attack where an attacker gains control they shouldn't have. Since the question mentions these three actions don't involve unauthorized control, usurpation might not be the right answer. Unauthorized disclosure, that sounds like a breach of confidentiality. For example, data being leaked or accessed without permission. But the question's threat actions don't seem to involve exposing information, so this might not be it. Deception. This would involve tricking a system or user, such as phishing attacks or spoofing. The actions listed don't seem to be about deception but rather about disrupting operations, so deception might not fit here. Disruption. This directly relates to interrupting or impairing the system's operations. Since all three actions prevent the system from functioning properly, disruption seems to be the consequence here. The note provided also supports this. It says that these actions interfere with normal operations, availability, or integrity, leading to disruption. Usurpation is about unauthorized control, which isn't relevant here. Unauthorized disclosure is about confidentiality, and deception is about misleading. Therefore, the correct answer should be disruption. Okay, so the question is asking which three key security services are required to secure data in transit. The options are anti-replay protection, integrity, confidentiality, authentication, accounting, and authorization. Let me think about each of these. First, I remember that securing data in transit usually involves encryption. That makes me think of confidentiality because encryption ensures that the data can't be read by unauthorized parties. So confidentiality is probably one of the correct answers. Next, integrity. I think that's about making sure the data isn't altered during transmission. Like, using hashes or checksums to verify that the data hasn't been tampered with. So integrity should be another one. Then there's authentication. This is about verifying the identity of the parties involved. If you're sending data, you want to make sure it's going to the right person and that the person sending it is legitimate. Without authentication, someone could impersonate either end, leading to man-in-the-middle attacks. So authentication is likely the third key service. Anti-replay protection is mentioned as a mechanism that supports integrity. The explanation says it's not a standalone service. So even though it's important, it's more of a feature that helps with integrity rather than a primary service itself. Accounting and authorization are part of access control. Accounting tracks resource usage, and authorization determines what resources a user can access. But these are more about managing access after authentication rather than directly protecting data during transmission. So they probably aren't the right answers here. Putting it all together, the three key services should be confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. Anti-replay is a subset of integrity, and the others are related to access control, which isn't the focus for data in transit security. Okay, so I need to figure out what spear phishing is. Let's start by recalling what I know about phishing in general. Phishing is when attackers try to trick people into giving up personal information, usually through emails or messages that look like they're from legitimate sources. But spear phishing is a more targeted version, right? The options here are: A. Doesn't identify the recipient, B. Only delivered by email, C. Targets only finance employees, D. Identifies the recipient in some way. From what I remember, regular phishing is broad, like sending out tons of emails hoping someone bites. Spear phishing is more targeted. So the key difference is that spear phishing is directed at specific individuals or organizations. That would mean the attacker has done some research on the target. So maybe they use the recipient's name, position, or other personal details to make the attack seem more legitimate. That would align with option D. Option A says it doesn't identify the recipient, which sounds like the opposite of spear phishing. Option B says it's only by email, but couldn't spear phishing also happen via other methods like social media or SMS? I think it's not limited to email. Option C is too specific. While finance employees might be common targets, spear phishing can target anyone in any department. So the correct answer should be D. Okay, let's tackle this question about single sign-on systems. The task is to identify the incorrect statement. Let's go through each option one by one. First, the options are: 1. Reduce the overhead of resetting passwords by system administrators. 2. Improve administrators' ability of managing user accounts and access control. 3. Motivate users to use a strong password. 4. Reduce the possibility of single point of failure and total compromise of company IT assets. 5. SSO systems centralize authentication, which inherently creates a single point of failure. If the SSO service is compromised, attackers could gain access to all linked systems, increasing the risk of total compromise. The other statements are accurate benefits of SSO, such as reducing password reset overhead, improving administrative control, and encouraging stronger passwords. Wait, actually, the fifth point seems like an explanation rather than an option. Let me check the original question again. The user listed the options as 4, then added a fifth point which is actually part of the explanation. So the options are the first 4, and the fifth is the reasoning. The question is asking to select the incorrect statement from the four given. The incorrect statement is the one that is not a true fact about SSO. Let's analyze each. 1. Reduce password reset overhead. SSO means users have one password instead of multiple. So if they forget it, they only need to reset one, which reduces the number of password resets admins handle. This makes sense, so this statement is correct. 2. Improve admin ability to manage accounts. With SSO, admins can manage all access from one place. Centralized control should make it easier, so this statement is correct. 3. Motivate strong passwords. Since users only have one password to remember, they might be more inclined to create a strong one, rather than using weak ones for multiple accounts. This is a common argument for SSO, so this statement is correct. 4. Reduce possibility of single point of failure. Wait, SSO centralizes authentication. Centralization typically creates a single point of failure. If the SSO service goes down, users can't access any systems. Also, if it's compromised, attackers get access to everything. So this statement is actually incorrect. The fourth option claims SSO reduces single point of failure, which is false. Instead, SSO introduces a single point of failure. Therefore, the incorrect statement is option 4. The fifth part of the user's message explains that SSO creates a single point of failure, which contradicts option 4. Therefore, the incorrect statement is option 4. Okay, so the question is about identifying the correct access control model based on the description provided. The key points mentioned are that the policy is discretionary, based on the identity of the requester, and uses access rules defined by data owners. The answer given is discretionary access control, and the explanation contrasts it with MAC and RBAC. Let me break this down. The main characteristics here are the use of identity, data owners setting permissions, and mechanisms like ACLS. DAC fits because it's about owners deciding who gets access. MAC is more about security labels and clearances, often used in government or military contexts where access isn't at the owner's discretion. RBAC uses roles instead of individual identities, so permissions are assigned to roles, not directly to users or groups. I need to make sure that the explanation correctly ties each part of the question to DAC. The mention of allowing or denying access through explicit grants by owners points directly to DAC. The use of ACLS is a common implementation detail for DAC. The other models don't have that flexibility because they rely on different structures. Also, the term discretionary implies that the control is at the discretion of the owner, which is exactly what DAC is. The explanation provided in the answer seems accurate. The only thing to watch out for is ensuring that there's no confusion with RBAC, which might sometimes involve groups, but in RBAC, it's roles, not individual identities or owner-defined rules. MAC is top-down, so not based on user discretion. So yes, the answer makes sense. The user's identity and owner-defined rules are central to DAC, and the contrast with MAC and RBAC helps eliminate those options. The key terms in the question like data owners define access rules and access control lists all point to DAC. Okay, let's tackle this question. So, I need to match each description to the correct malicious software type or category. The options given are rootkit, worm, adware, macrovirus, and backdoor. Let me go through each one step by step. First description, designed to provide continuous privileged access to computer systems. Privileged access. That sounds like something that gains admin or root access. Rootkits are known for hiding themselves and maintaining access. Yeah, rootkit makes sense here because they're all about maintaining persistent access, often at a high privilege level. Next, propagate usually by exploiting vulnerabilities. Propagation through vulnerabilities makes me think of worms. Worms spread automatically across networks by exploiting security flaws. Unlike viruses, they don't need to attach to a file. So that's definitely a worm. Third one, advertising that is integrated into software. That's adware. Adware is software that displays unwanted ads, often bundled with other programs. The key here is the integration of ads into the software, which is exactly what adware does. Fourth description, malware code consists of portable instructions and works in different platforms. Portable instructions and cross-platform. Macro viruses come to mind. They use macros from documents which can run on any system that supports those applications, making them platform independent. So macro virus fits here. Last one, any mechanism that bypasses regular security measures when accessing systems. That's a backdoor. Backdoors are methods to bypass normal authentication, allowing unauthorized access. They can be part of malware or intentionally placed by developers for remote access. So backdoor matches this description. Let me double check each pair to make sure there's no mix-up. Rootkit for privileged access, worm for exploiting vulnerabilities to spread, adware for ads, macro virus for cross-platform via macros, backdoor for bypassing security. Yep, that all lines up with what I remember from studying malware types. I think that's all correct. Okay, let's see. I need to match the virus life cycle phases to their descriptions. The user gave 4 descriptions and 4 phases. Let me start by recalling each phase's definition. First, the dormant phase is when the virus is inactive and hidden. The description here is does not perform any activity, which seems to fit because dormant means not active. So that's dormant phase. Next, the propagation phase is about spreading. The description says tries to get infected to other files and systems. Yep, propagation is all about spreading, so that's definitely propagation phase. Then the triggering phase is when the virus is activated by a specific event. The description here is gets activated to perform the task the virus is designed to perform. So that matches triggering phase because it's about being activated by an event or condition. Finally, the execution phase is when the payload is delivered. The description is releases the payload, which lines up perfectly. Execution phase is when the actual harmful action happens. Let me double check each one to make sure I didn't mix them up. Dormant is inactive, propagation spreads, triggering is activation, execution delivers payload. The given descriptions match each of these. I think that's correct. No conflicts here. All the pairs seem to align with the definitions provided. Okay, so I need to explain what an exploit toolkit is, based on the given information. Let me start by breaking down the original statement. The user mentioned that an exploit toolkit can create sophisticated malware with advanced payloads and propagation mechanisms. The explanation given talks about automating exploitation of vulnerabilities, using pre-written code for known vulnerabilities, and how attackers use these toolkits to deploy malware without developing exploits from scratch. They also mention that these toolkits are associated with spreading malware through compromised systems and are key in cyber attacks. First, I need to make sure I understand each component. An exploit is a piece of code that takes advantage of a vulnerability in software. A toolkit, in this context, would be a collection of such exploits and other tools. The key points here are automation, use of known vulnerabilities, pre-written code, delivery of payloads, and propagation mechanisms. The user's answer already explains these points, but maybe I can elaborate more. For example, why are these toolkits significant? Because they lower the barrier to entry for attackers, even those without deep technical skills can use them. Also, maybe mention some examples of well-known exploit kits, like Angler or Rig. But the original text doesn't mention examples, so maybe stick to the general explanation. I should also explain terms like payloads and propagation mechanisms. Payloads could be ransomware, spyware, etc., and propagation mechanisms could be methods like email attachments, infected websites, or network-based spreading. The toolkits automate the process of finding vulnerabilities and deploying these payloads. Another point is that these kits are often sold on the dark web, making them accessible to a range of attackers. They might include features like obfuscation to avoid detection by antivirus software. Also, they might be updated frequently to include the latest vulnerabilities, which makes them more dangerous. Wait, the original answer mentions that toolkits allow attackers to deploy sophisticated malware without developing exploits from scratch. So, the emphasis is on the ease of use and the pre-existing code. This means that even less skilled attackers can carry out complex attacks. I should also consider the structure of the answer. Start by defining an exploit toolkit, then explain how it works, mention payloads and propagation, and conclude with their role in cyber attacks. Maybe also touch on mitigation strategies, but the original answer doesn't mention that, so perhaps stick to the explanation given. Check if there's anything missing in the original answer. It covers the automation, pre-written code, delivery of payloads, propagation, and association with cyber attacks. Maybe the answer could also note that these kits are often used in drive-by downloads or phishing campaigns, but again, unless the original text mentions it, maybe not. The user's answer is concise and covers the main points. My job here is to present a clear, step-by-step explanation based on the given information. So, in summary, an exploit toolkit is a set of tools that automates finding and exploiting vulnerabilities, uses existing code for known issues, allows easy deployment of advanced malware, and helps spread it through various mechanisms, making cyber attacks more accessible and effective. Okay, let's tackle this question. The question is asking about a strategy where the system periodically uses brute force tools to find weak passwords. The options are user education, proactive password checking, computer-generated password, and reactive password checking. First, I need to understand each term. User education is about teaching users to create strong passwords, which is more about awareness than automated testing. Computer-generated passwords are those created by the system, which might be strong but doesn't involve checking existing ones. Proactive password checking, as mentioned in the explanation, enforces rules when creating passwords, like requiring a mix of characters. That's during the creation phase. Reactive password checking, on the other hand, happens after passwords are created. The system runs tests periodically, like brute force tools, to find weak ones. The key here is the timing. Proactive is during creation, reactive is after. Since the question mentions time to time and existing passwords, reactive fits. The explanation also confirms that reactive involves testing existing passwords, so that's the answer. Okay, let's see. The question is asking about a type of access control that's based on users' roles within the system and rules that specify what accesses are allowed for those roles. The options are RBAC, MAC, DAC, and NAC. First, I need to recall what each acronym stands for. RBAC is role-based access control. MAC is mandatory access control. DAC is discretionary access control. NAC is network access control. The question mentions roles and rules tied to those roles. So, I'm thinking RBAC here because role-based directly refers to roles. Let me think about each option in detail. RBAC assigns permissions based on the user's role in the organization. For example, a manager might have access to certain files that a regular employee doesn't. There are predefined rules about what each role can do. This matches the description in the question pretty closely. MAC, this is more about security labels and classifications. Like in the military, where documents are classified as top secret, secret, etc. Access is determined by the user's clearance level and the classification of the resource. It's not based on roles but on labels and clearances, which is different from what the question is describing. DAC, here, the owner of the resource decides who gets access. For example, if I create a file, I can set permissions for other users. This is more discretionary and not based on roles set by the system. So if the question was about owners controlling access, DAC would be the answer, but it's not the case here. NAC, network access control, deals with devices accessing a network. It checks if a device meets certain security standards before allowing access. This is more about network security and compliance, not user roles within a system. So NAC doesn't fit here. Putting it all together, the answer should be RBAC because it directly involves roles and rules governing access based on those roles. The other options don't fit the role-based aspect described in the question. Okay, let's see. The question is about how digital signatures are created and verified for a message sent over a network. The options are A, B, C, D. I need to figure out which one is correct. First, I remember that digital signatures involve public key cryptography. The basic idea is that the sender uses their private key to encrypt something, and the receiver uses the sender's public key to decrypt it. That way, if the decryption works, it must have been signed with the sender's private key, which only they have. But wait, digital signatures aren't about encrypting the whole message. Instead, they usually create a hash of the message and then encrypt that hash with the private key. The hash is a fixed size string generated from the message, and encrypting it ensures integrity and authenticity. So when the receiver gets the message, they decrypt the encrypted hash with the sender's public key, then hash the received message themselves and compare the two hashes. If they match, the message hasn't been altered and it's from the sender. Looking at the options. A. Creation encrypts the hash with private key, verification decrypts with public key. That aligns with what I was thinking. The sender's private key is used to encrypt the hash, so only their public key can decrypt it. So verification would involve decrypting the signature with the public key to get the original hash, then comparing with a newly computed hash of the message. B uses a shared key. That sounds more like symmetric encryption, which isn't used for digital signatures. Shared keys are for things like AES where both parties have the same key. but digital signatures require asymmetric keys, so B is probably wrong. C. Creation uses public key of sender. Wait, the public key is for others to use. If the sender encrypts with their own public key, that doesn't make sense because anyone can get the public key. That wouldn't prove it's from the sender. So C is incorrect. D. Creation uses public key of the receiver. That seems like it's mixing up encryption for confidentiality with signing. When you encrypt a message for confidentiality, you use the receiver's public key. But for signing, you use your own private key. So D is mixing those concepts. Verification using the receiver's private key doesn't fit either because the receiver's private key would be used to decrypt messages encrypted with their public key, not for verifying signatures. So putting it all together, option A is the correct one. The sender encrypts the hash with their private key, and the receiver decrypts it with the sender's public key to verify. Okay, let's try to figure out the annual loss expected due to virus infections for this IT company. The problem gives a scenario with some numbers, and I need to apply the right formulas to get the answer. Let me break it down step by step. First, the company has 250 workstations. Each user makes an average of $20 an hour. Previously, they didn't have antivirus because there was no internet, but now they have broadband, so there's a risk. The manager read that there's a 50% chance of virus infection annually, and each infection might take up to 3 hours to restore. The question is asking for the annual loss expectancy due to viruses. From what I remember, AL is calculated by multiplying the single loss expectancy by the annual rate of occurrence. So the formula is AL equals SLE asterisk arrow. Let me confirm the SLE first. SLE is the cost of a single incident. In this case, if a virus infects the network, how much would that cost? The problem says it takes up to 3 hours to restore applications. Each workstation is used by a user making $20/hour. If all 250 workstations are down for 3 hours, the cost would be the number of workstations multiplied by the hours of downtime multiplied by the hourly rate. So that's 250*3*20. Calculating that, 250*3 is 750, and 750*20 is 15,000. So SLE is $15,000 per incident. Next, the annual rate of occurrence is the probability of the event happening in a year. The manager read that there's a 50% chance, which is 0.5 in decimal form. So arrow is 0.5. Now, multiply SLE by arrow to get AL, 15,000*0.5 equals 7,500. So the annual expected loss is $7,500. Wait, let me check if there's anything I missed. The problem mentions that the users make an average of $20 an hour. Is that the cost per hour per user? So when the workstations are down, each user can't work, hence the company loses $20 per hour per user. That makes sense. So yes, calculating the total cost as 250 users *3 hours $20/hour is correct. Another thing to consider, does the 50% chance mean that there's a 0.5 arrow? Since arrow is the expected number of incidents per year, a 50% chance would indeed translate to an arrow of 0.5. For example, if there's a 50% chance of 1 incident per year, then on average, you can expect 0.5 incidents per year. That seems right. So putting it all together, the calculation seems solid. 250*3*20 equals 15,000 for SLE, times 0.5 arrow gives 7,500. I think that's the answer. Let me just make sure there aren't any hidden assumptions or different interpretations. Wait, could the 3 hours be per workstation or total? The problem says it may take up to 3 hours to restore applications that have been damaged or destroyed. So does that mean each workstation takes 3 hours, or the entire network takes 3 hours? The wording is a bit ambiguous, but since it's about restoring applications, maybe it's 3 hours total downtime for the network. But if each workstation is down for 3 hours, then the calculation is correct as 250*3. However, if the entire network is down for 3 hours regardless of the number of workstations, then maybe the downtime is 3 hours total. Wait, but if all workstations are connected, maybe a virus would affect all of them, requiring each to be restored. But the problem states it may take up to 3 hours to restore applications, so perhaps per workstation? Or maybe the applications are centralized, and restoring them takes 3 hours, during which all workstations are down. That would mean the total downtime is 3 hours for all workstations. In that case, the total cost would be 250 workstations *3 hours $20/hour. Which is the same as before. So regardless of whether it's per workstation or total, the calculation ends up the same because it's 3 hours of downtime for all. Maybe that's why the answer is straightforward. So the answer is 7,500. I think that's correct. Okay, let's try to figure out the difference between access control lists and capability tickets. I remember from my studies that both are related to access control in computer security, but the exact distinction is a bit fuzzy for me. Let me start by recalling what each term means. An access control list, or ACL, is something I've heard about in the context of file systems and network security. I think it's a list attached to an object that specifies which users or system processes have access to that object and what operations they can perform. For example, a file might have an ACL that says user A can read and write, while user B can only read. So the ACL is tied to the object, and it's about who can access it. That makes sense. So the ACL answers the question, who can access this object, and how? On the other hand, a capability ticket seems different. The term capability makes me think of something a user holds that grants them certain rights. Maybe it's like a key that allows the user to access certain resources. So instead of the object maintaining a list of who can access it, the user has a ticket or token that lists the objects they can access and their permissions there. So the capability ticket is user-centric, answering, what objects can this user access, and how? Let me check if I have this right. ACL is object-focused, each object has a list of users and their permissions. CT is user-focused, each user has a list of objects they can access. So the main difference is the perspective. ACLs are attached to objects, while CTs are held by users. Looking at the options provided. 1. There is no difference. Well, that's obviously incorrect because they are two different mechanisms. 2. ACL is used for access control while CT are used to define the privileges. Both are for access control, so this seems vague. Maybe not the best answer. 3. ACL determines what access rights a user has on different objects while CT lists users and their access rights to access a particular object. Wait, this seems reversed. If ACL is per object, then it would list users for that object. So if ACL determines user rights on different objects, that would be more like CT. Maybe this option is mixing them up. For ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. This sounds correct. ACL is per object, CT is per user. So this matches my earlier understanding. 5. The last bullet points confirm the same. ACL is object-focused, CT is user-focused. So the correct answer is either the fourth option or the fifth. But looking at the options given, the fourth option is the textual answer, while the fifth is separated as bullet points. The user might have formatted the options with the fifth being part of the selection. Wait, let me check the original question again. The options are 1. No difference. 2. ACL for access control, CT for privileges. 3. ACL determines users' rights on different objects, CT lists users for a particular object. 4. ACL lists users for a particular object, CT determines users' rights on different objects. 5 bullet points explaining ACL is object-focused and CT is user-focused. But in the question, the user pasted the options as select 1. There is no difference between ACL and CT. ACL is used for access control while CT are used to define the privileges of users within a system. ACL determines what access rights a user has on different objects while CT lists users and their access rights to access a particular object. ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. Access control list equals object-focused. Capability ticket equals user-focused. Wait, the last bullet points are part of the options. It looks like the user might have formatted them as part of the options, perhaps as the fifth option. But sometimes, in such multiple-choice questions, bullet points might be explanations rather than options. However, in the given text, the user wrote select 1 followed by each option, including the bullets. So possibly, the last 2 bullet points are the fifth option, which is combining both points into one answer. But in the system, each line after select 1 is a separate option. So the options are 5 in total. 1. No difference. 2. ACL for access control, CT for privileges. 3. ACL determines users' rights on different objects, CT lists users per object. 4. ACL lists users per object, CT determines users' rights across objects. 5. The bullet points explaining object-focused vs user-focused. But the user might have intended the bullets as a single option. If that's the case, then the fifth option is the correct one. However, looking at the exact wording of the options, the fourth option says, ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. This aligns with the idea that ACL is per object, listing users, while CT is per user, listing their access across objects. The fifth option similarly states ACL is object-focused and CT is user-focused. Both the fourth and fifth options seem correct. Wait, but perhaps the fifth option is just a rephrasing of the fourth. Let me check the exact wording. Fourth option, ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. Fifth bullet points, ACL equals object-focused. CT equals user-focused. So they are equivalent. But in the list of options, perhaps the fifth is presented as a separate option. However, in the way the user presented the question, the bullets are part of the same option? The formatting is a bit confusing. The original question has the options as separate paragraphs, with the bullets as the last option. If the bullets are part of the fifth option, then that's the correct answer. But if the bullets are just explanations, then the fourth option is correct. But looking at the actual content, the fourth option and the fifth bullets are both correct. However, in standard test questions, sometimes the answer is phrased in different ways. The key is to note that ACL is associated with the object, while CT is associated with the user. So the correct answer is the fourth option, which states that ACL lists users per object and CT determines users' rights across objects. Alternatively, the fifth bullet points also explain the same concept. However, depending on how the options are structured, the user may have to choose between the two. In some cases, the fifth option is a more concise explanation, but since it's presented as bullet points, maybe it's part of the same option. But in the user's message, the options are listed with each as a separate line, so the fifth option is the bullets. However, in the original questions code, the fifth option is written with bullets but might be considered as one option. Alternatively, maybe the last two bullet points are combined as a single option. But given that the user included the fifth option as two bullet points, which in the context of the question would be a single option, then the answer would be the fifth. However, in standard multiple choice exams, sometimes such options are presented as separate, but in this case, the user included them as part of the answer options. Given that, the correct answer is the fifth option, which explicitly states the object-focused vs user-focused distinction. However, the fourth option also correctly states the same concept. Wait, let me compare. Fourth option, ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. Fifth option, ACL is object-focused, CT is user-focused. They are two different ways of saying the same thing. Both are correct. However, looking back at the standard definitions, the ACL is indeed attached to the object, listing permissions per user, whereas the capability is associated with the user, listing their permissions across objects. Therefore, both the fourth and fifth options are correct. But in the given options, perhaps the fifth is the correct one as it's more precise in the focus. However, in some sources, the fourth option is also a correct phrasing. Wait, perhaps the confusion comes from the wording of the fourth option, ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object. Yes, that's correct. CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. Yes, because the capability ticket is per user. So the fourth option is correct. The fifth option's bullets also capture this. But if the fifth option is considered a separate answer, then which one to choose? Since the user included the bullets as part of the answer options, I think they might be separate. However, the fifth option is two separate bullet points, which might be considered as a single option. In that case, it's correct. However, the fourth option is also correct. Let me check authoritative sources. According to computer security textbooks, ACLs are indeed object-centric. Each object has an ACL that specifies which subjects have what access rights. Capabilities, on the other hand, are tied to the subject. A capability is a token that grants the holder certain rights to an object. So when a user has a capability ticket, it lists the objects they can access and their permissions. Therefore, ACL answers who can access this object, and capabilities answer what can this user access. Thus, the correct answer is the fifth option if it's presented as a single option combining both points. Otherwise, the fourth option is also correct. But in the given options, the fourth and fifth both seem correct. Wait, let me check the exact wording again. The fourth option says, ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. The fifth option says, ACL is object-focused, CT is user-focused. Both are correct. However, perhaps the fifth option is a better answer because it uses the terms object-focused and user-focused, which are standard ways to differentiate ACLs and capabilities. The fourth option is correct but uses more verbose language. In some test scenarios, if both options are present, but one is more precise, the more precise one is correct. However, in the given options, the fourth and fifth are separate options. Therefore, if the fifth is an option, that's the answer. But looking at the way the user presented the options, each line after select one is an option, including the bullet points. Therefore, the fifth option is the last one, combining both points. Hence, the correct answer is the fifth option. However, the fourth option is also a correct statement. This is a bit confusing. Alternatively, maybe the user made a mistake in formatting. The fifth option with bullets might be part of the explanation, not an answer option. Let me look again. Original question. 33. What is the difference between access control list and capability ticket? Select 1. There is no difference between ACL and CT. ACL is used for access control while CT are used to define the privileges of users within a system. ACL determines what access rights a user has on different objects while CT lists users and their access rights to access a particular object. ACL lists users and their access rights to a particular object while CT determines what access rights a user has on different objects. Access control list equals object-focused. Capability ticket equals user-focused. Wait, the last two lines start with bullets, which may have been intended as part of the answer options. But in the given structure, each option is a line. So the last two bullets are separate options. Or is it a single option with two bullet points? The way it's written, each line after select one is a separate option. Therefore, the options are 1. There is no difference. 2. ACL for access control, CT for privileges. 3. ACL determines users' rights on objects, CT lists users per object. 4. ACL lists users per object, CT determines users' rights on objects. 5. Access control list equals object-focused. 6. Capability ticket equals user-focused. But the user only numbered them up to the fifth option. Wait, perhaps the bullets are part of the same fifth option. That is, the fifth option is a combination of both bullet points. But in the user's message, the bullets are on separate lines. This is unclear. However, given that the user included the bullets in the options, it's possible that each bullet is a separate option, but that would make 6 options, which contradicts the select one instruction. Therefore, it's more likely that the bullets are part of the fifth option, combining both points into one answer. In that case, the fifth option is the correct one, as it directly contrasts the object-focused vs user-focused nature, which is the key difference. The fourth option is also correct but uses different wording, while the fifth option uses the standard terminology. Therefore, the correct answer is the fifth option with the bullet points. Okay, so I need to figure out which controls are most suitable against workstation hijacking. The options are automatic logout after inactivity, challenge response protocols, anomaly-based intrusion detection, and enforcing strong password policies. Let me think through each one. Automatic logout makes sense. If someone leaves their workstation unlocked and walks away, automatically logging out after a period of inactivity would prevent others from accessing it. That's a common security measure I've seen in places like banks or on corporate computers. So that's probably a good choice. Challenge response protocols. I remember that these are authentication methods where the server sends a challenge, and the client provides a response based on that, often using cryptographic methods. This can prevent replay attacks because each challenge is unique. But how does that directly prevent workstation hijacking? If someone has already taken over the workstation, maybe challenge response isn't the first line of defense. It might be more about securing authentication rather than preventing hijacking once the session is active. Not sure yet, maybe not the best fit. Anomaly-based intrusion detection. This would monitor user behavior and flag anything unusual. If a hijacker takes over a workstation, their behavior might differ from the legitimate user, like accessing different files, logging in at odd hours, or using different applications. The system could detect these anomalies and alert admins or block the session. That sounds effective for detecting ongoing hijacking, so this seems like a good option. Enforcing password policies. Strong passwords are definitely important because they make it harder for attackers to guess or brute force credentials. If the password is strong, unauthorized access through credential theft is less likely. But once the workstation is hijacked, does a password policy help? Maybe not directly, but it's a preventive measure. However, the question is about controls against hijacking, which could include both prevention and detection. So maybe this is a valid answer too. Wait, the question says most suitable controls against workstation hijacking. Workstation hijacking might refer to someone taking over an active session. Like when a user leaves their desk without logging out. So automatic logout directly addresses that by ending the session. Anomaly detection can catch suspicious activity if the hijacker starts doing things. Password policies prevent initial unauthorized access, which could lead to hijacking if the attacker guesses the password. Challenge response might be more about securing authentication transactions rather than the workstation itself. So putting it together, automatic logout, anomaly detection, and password policies. Challenge response might be less directly related. Let me check the explanations given. Automatic logout prevents unauthorized access to unattended logged-in workstations. That's exactly hijacking prevention. Anomaly detection identifies suspicious activity like unusual access patterns, which could indicate hijacking. Password policy reduces risk of credential-based attacks, which are a common vector. So all three of those are valid. Challenge response isn't mentioned in the explanations. So the correct answers should be the first, third, and fourth options. Challenge response might be more for network authentication rather than workstation hijacking specifically. Okay, so the question is about which protocols counter threats to remote user authentication systems. The options are challenge response, communication, denial of service, and file transfer. First, I need to recall what each of these protocols does. Challenge response sounds familiar from security topics. I think it's where the server sends a challenge and the client responds with a hash or some computed value using that challenge. This prevents replay attacks because each challenge is unique. So even if someone intercepts the response, they can't reuse it later. That makes sense for securing authentication. Communication protocols, like TCP/IP, are more about how data is sent over the network. They handle the transmission but don't directly address security threats. They ensure data gets from point A to B but not necessarily securely unless paired with something else like SSL/TLS. Denial of service is actually a type of attack where the system is overwhelmed with traffic, making it unavailable. So it's a threat itself, not a protocol to counter threats. The question is asking for a protocol used to counter threats, so DOS wouldn't be the answer here. File transfer protocols, such as FTP, are for moving files between systems. FTP isn't related to authentication security. In fact, traditional FTP isn't secure unless using secure versions like SFTP or FTPS, which add encryption. But the basic file transfer protocol isn't about authentication threats. Putting it all together, challenge response is designed to prevent attacks like replay in authentication. The other options either don't address security or are themselves attacks. So the correct answer should be challenge response. Okay, let's tackle this question about role-based access control. The question asks which statement is incorrect regarding RBAC systems. The options are: 1. One role can be assigned to many users. 2 users are assigned roles either statically or dynamically. 3 roles can be reused. 4. One user cannot be given access to many roles. 5 roles are usually defined based on a job function in the organization. First, I need to recall what I know about RBAC. From what I remember, RBAC is a method of regulating access to computer or network resources based on the roles of individual users within an organization. Roles are created for various job functions, and permissions to perform certain operations are assigned to specific roles. Users are then assigned to roles, thereby gaining the permissions associated with those roles. Let's go through each option one by one. Option 1, one role can be assigned to many users. That makes sense. In RBAC, a role is a collection of permissions, and multiple users can be assigned to the same role. For example, all managers might have the same role with the same set of permissions. So this statement seems correct. Option 2, users are assigned roles either statically or dynamically. Static role assignment is when a user is manually assigned a role, and dynamic might involve some conditions or attributes. I think RBAC can support both, especially with more advanced implementations. For example, dynamic role assignment could be based on time of day or specific project involvement. So this statement seems correct as well. Option 3, roles can be reused. Reusing roles probably means that once a role is defined, it can be assigned to multiple users, which ties back to option 1. Also, roles are typically designed to be reusable across the organization as needed. So this statement is correct. Option 4, one user cannot be given access to many roles. In RBAC, it's common for a user to have multiple roles if their job requires different sets of permissions. For instance, a user might be both a project manager and a compliance officer, each with different roles. Therefore, this statement seems incorrect. Users can indeed have multiple roles assigned to them. So this might be the answer. Option 5, roles are usually defined based on a job function in the organization. Yes, that's the foundation of RBAC. Roles are created according to job responsibilities, like HR manager, developer, finance analyst, etc. Each role has permissions that align with the tasks associated with that job. So this is correct. Putting it all together, the incorrect statement is option 4 because RBAC allows users to have multiple roles. The other options all describe accurate aspects of RBAC systems. Okay, So the question is about what algorithm converts ciphertext back to plain text. The user mentioned decryption already, but maybe they want to confirm that term. Let me think. First, I know encryption is the process of turning plain text into ciphertext using an algorithm and a key. So the reverse process would logically be decryption. But maybe there are other terms. For example, sometimes people talk about ciphers, but a cipher can refer to both encryption and decryption methods. Wait, the question is specifically asking for the algorithm that does the reverse. The term decryption algorithm seems straightforward. But is there another term used? Like, in some contexts, people might refer to it as a cipher suite or something else. But no, I think decryption algorithm is the standard term. Let me double check. In cryptography, the two main processes are encryption and decryption. The encryption algorithm transforms plain text to ciphertext, and the decryption algorithm transforms it back. So the answer should be decryption. The original sentence has decryption in the blank, so maybe the user is just confirming that. But perhaps they want to ensure that there isn't a more technical term. Maybe decipher algorithm. But deciphering is the process, and the algorithm is still called decryption. Alternatively, could it be a specific type like symmetric key decryption or asymmetric? But the question seems general. So I think the answer is simply decryption. The sentence says a decryption algorithm is used, so they're filling in the blank with decryption. Therefore, the correct term is decryption. I don't see any other terms that fit here. Maybe decryptor, but that's more of a tool or program rather than the algorithm itself. So yeah, decryption algorithm is correct. Okay, let's see. I need to match the block cipher modes to the given descriptions. Let's start by recalling what I know about CBC and ECB. First, ECB stands for Electronic Code Book. From what I remember, ECB encrypts each block of plain text separately. So if there are identical plain text blocks, they'll produce identical ciphertext blocks. That's a security issue because patterns in the plain text can be seen in the ciphertext. So ECB is less secure and not recommended for large data with patterns. It's maybe okay for small data that's random, where patterns aren't an issue. CBC, which is cipher block chaining, adds more security. Each plain text block is XORed with the previous ciphertext block before encryption. This means even if two plain text blocks are the same, their ciphertext will be different because each depends on the previous block. Also, CBC requires an initialization vector to start the process, which adds randomness. So CBC is more secure and suitable for larger amounts of data, especially structured data with patterns because it hides those patterns. Now looking at the given descriptions. One more secure. That's definitely CBC because ECB is less secure. 2. Produce the same ciphertext blocks for identical plain text blocks. ECB, since each block is encrypted independently. 3. Use to encrypt short amount of data. ECB, because it's only safe for small, random data. If the data is large or has patterns, ECB isn't good. 4. Use to encrypt large amount of data with patterns. CBC, as it's better for structured data and hides patterns. 5. Both parallel encryption and decryption of blocks are possible. Wait, ECB allows parallel encryption because each block is independent. But CBC can't do parallel encryption since each block depends on the previous. However, decryption in CBC can be parallelized because you can decrypt a block and XOR with the previous ciphertext block once you have both. Wait, but the question says both encryption and decryption. Let me think. ECB allows parallel in both. For CBC, encryption is sequential, but decryption can be done in parallel. So if the statement is about both encryption and decryption being possible in parallel, then ECB is the answer. Because with ECB, you can encrypt all blocks at the same time. For CBC, encryption must be sequential. But decryption in CBC can be parallel. However, the question says both encryption and decryption, so maybe ECB is the only one where both are possible. Wait, but for ECB, encryption is parallel and decryption is also parallel. For CBC, encryption can't be parallel, but decryption can. So the answer here is ECB for both parallel encryption and decryption. Let me check the table provided. The features listed for CBC and ECB. For CBC, security level is more secure, ciphertext pattern is different even for identical plain text. Data suitability is for large structured data. ECB, less secure, identical ciphertext, suitable for small random data. Also, in the features section, under both parallel encryption and decryption, the answer is ECB. Because ECB can process each block independently, so encryption can be parallel, and decryption can be as well. While CBC's encryption is not parallelizable, but decryption is. But the question states both parallel encryption and decryption, so ECB is the correct answer here. So putting it all together. 1 more secure. CBC. 2 produce same ciphertext blocks. ECB. 3 encrypt short amount, ECB. 4 encrypt large data with patterns, CBC. 5 both parallel encryption and decryption, ECB. The table seems to confirm this. The security levels are CBC more secure, ECB less. Ciphertext patterns, ECB has identical, CBC different. Data suitability, CBC for large structured, ECB for small random. And parallel processing, ECB allows both, while CBC's encryption can't be parallel. Okay, let me try to work through this matching problem. So, the task is to connect each description to the correct access control requirement term. Let's look at each one step by step. First, the description says, access control systems must use only dependable and accurate details provided by other systems. The options given are reliable inputs, fine-grained specifications, open policies, separation of duty, and administrative policies. The key here is dependable and accurate details. That sounds like the system needs inputs it can trust. So reliable input seems right for this one. Because if the inputs aren't reliable, the access control can't function properly. Yeah, that makes sense. Next one, access control systems should allow access to be regulated at the level of individual records in files, and individual fields within records. The term here is probably about granularity. Fine-grained specifications comes to mind. Because regulating access down to individual records and fields is very detailed, which is what fine-grained means. So that's a match. Third description, authorizations specify which accesses are prohibited, all other accesses are allowed. This seems like a policy where everything is allowed unless explicitly denied. I remember that in access control, there are open and closed policies. Open policies allow by default and only prohibit specified items, while closed policies deny by default and allow specified ones. So this should be open policies. Yep, that fits. Fourth, dividing the steps in a system function among different individuals, so as to keep a single individual from subverting the process. This is a classic security principle. Separation of duty, or separation of duties, ensures that no single person has all the power to complete a critical task alone. So separation of duty is the right term here. Last one, controls the functionalities of administrators, dealing with authorization database. This is about managing administrative roles and their permissions. Administrative policies would define how admins can handle the authorization database, like who can modify access rights. So administrative policies is the correct match here. Let me just double check each to make sure I didn't mix any up. The first one is definitely reliable inputs. Second is fine-grained. Third is open policies, since it's about prohibiting specific things. Fourth is separation of duty. Fifth is administrative policies. That all lines up. I don't see any mistakes here. Each term matches the description accurately based on what I know about access control models and principles. Okay, let's tackle this question about stream ciphers. The question is asking which statements are incorrect. Let me go through each option one by one. First, the statement says, can be much faster than block cipher when used for data transmitted over networks. I remember that stream ciphers encrypt data bit by bit or byte by byte, which can make them faster in some scenarios, especially where data comes in a continuous stream, like network communications. Block ciphers work on fixed size blocks and might require padding if the data doesn't fit exactly, which can add overhead. So maybe the statement is correct, meaning it's not the incorrect one. So probably not the answer. Second, size of ciphertext can become larger than plain text. Stream ciphers typically encrypt each bit/byte with a corresponding key stream bit/byte. So the ciphertext should be the same size as the plain text. But wait, if there's some kind of error or if they add something like an initialization vector, maybe that could increase the size. However, usually, IVs are sent separately or the ciphertext itself remains the same size. Block ciphers can add padding, which makes ciphertext larger, but stream ciphers shouldn't. So this statement might be incorrect, so possibly an answer. Third, encrypt plain text 1 byte or 1 bit at a time. That's exactly what stream ciphers do. They generate a key stream and XOR it with the plain text bit by bit or byte by byte, so the statement is correct, so not the answer. Fourth, Vigenera cipher is an example of a stream cipher. Wait, Vigenera is a classical cipher that works by shifting letters using a keyword. Since it applies the key in a repeating manner to each character, it's similar to a stream cipher where the key stream is periodic. I think Vigenera is considered a type of stream cipher, especially since each plain text character is encrypted individually with the corresponding key character. So this might be correct, but maybe some people argue it's a block cipher? No, I think it's a stream cipher. So if this statement is correct, then it's not the answer. But maybe I'm wrong here. Need to confirm, Vigenera uses a key that repeats, encrypting each letter one by one, so yes, stream cipher. So the statement is correct, so not the answer. Fifth, transform a fixed-length block of plain text into a common block of ciphertext of 64 or 128 bits. That's describing a block cipher, right? Like AES or DA. Stream ciphers don't work on fixed blocks, they process bits or bytes serially. So this statement is incorrect because it's describing block ciphers. Therefore, this is definitely an incorrect statement about stream ciphers. So the incorrect statements are the second, fifth. Wait, let me check again. The second, size of ciphertext can become larger than plain text. As I thought, stream ciphers don't add padding. So if the plain text is n bits, ciphertext is n bits. So in a pure stream cipher without any additional data, ciphertext size is same as plain text. So if the statement says ciphertext can become larger, that's incorrect. So that's incorrect. The fifth is definitely incorrect. The first statement, can be much faster than block cipher. Is that correct? Stream ciphers are generally faster in software? Or maybe it's the other way around. Wait, block ciphers can be optimized with hardware support, like AES-NI. But in some cases, stream ciphers can be faster because they don't require block processing and padding. But in terms of raw speed, some stream ciphers like RC4 are known to be fast. So the statement is correct. So the incorrect ones are statements 2 and 5. But let me check again. The fourth statement, vi-genera as a stream cipher. Yes, because each character is encrypted individually with a key stream. So vi-genera is a stream cipher. So that statement is correct, so not incorrect. So the incorrect statements are 2 and 5. Wait, but the options are to select one or more. So according to this analysis, options 2 and 5 are incorrect. Let me verify each again. 1 correct. 2 incorrect. 3 correct. 4 correct. 5 incorrect. Thus, the incorrect statements are 2 and 5. So the user should select those two. Thanks so much for watching. Hope this session gave you some solid insights into the world of cybersecurity. Whether you're here to level up your skills, prep for exams, or just stay cyber smart, you're doing the right thing, and I see you.